and this is actually the 59th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination. We're going to be talking today about election anomalies in the 2022 Georgia election. We're going to be talking about flaws in the risk-limited audit, both in the 2022 audit and in the 2020, just to recap the evidence that we found in the previous audit that showed that it did not actually verify the original election results. And then we want to tell you about our new complaint to preserve the ballots. We're suing certain counties for destroying the ballot images. If y'all remember, it was counties around the state destroyed over 1.7 million of the original ballot images from the 2020 election in violation of both federal and state law. And the Secretary of State chose to do nothing about that. In fact, actually even encouraged them to do it. And we'll give you all that evidence. So the sequence of events today, I want to just quickly pay a bit of a tribute to John F. Kennedy and the assassination. Yes, what we can do what not to do for your country. What can you do for your country? And I think the best thing we can do for our country is to talk a little bit about the reporting that happened back then, the false reporting, and tie that to the false reporting about election integrity today. I think you're going to find that really fascinating. Then we're going to go through the election anomalies. We're going to go through the risk-limited audit problems, and then we'll talk about the new litigation to preserve the ballots. So I'm going to move pretty quickly. I want to first spend just about 5 minutes on the Kennedy assassination, since this is the 59th anniversary today. If y'all are probably aware that at least, and this is very, very conservatively, at least 74% of Americans don't believe the garbage that they heard from the government or the news media in regards to the official version of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963. Let me give you two reasons for that. The official government version is that a lone assassin named Lee Harvey Oswald shot JFK while he was riding in the limo in Dealey Plaza. He shot him from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository with a Mannlicher Carcano rifle that had a bent scope, and it was originally manufactured in 1891 and had been discontinued since 1946, almost 20 years earlier. That's highly improbable, but if you want to go to the second thing, if you believe the official government version, if you're one of the 26% or so left that believe that, and that was back in 2004, that was before all the evidence came out, you also have to believe in the magic bullet theory. And this is the theory that came forth from Senator Arlen Specter, who was at that time a lawyer on the Warren Commission investigation. And he proposed this theory because they couldn't make all the bullets and everything line up and all the timing. And he said, well, maybe there was this one bullet. It must have entered Kennedy's back, exited his throat, turned right, entered Governor Connally, paused in midair for 2 seconds, made 5 entry and exit wounds total in Governor Connally and President Kennedy, and then appeared in pristine condition on a gurney in Parkland Memorial Hospital. That is the official government version of what happened, and that is the garbage that's been floating around for 59 years. So what is the actual truth of this assassination? Basically, with fingerprint analysis, paraffin test, nitrate test, and a neutron activation analysis prove that Oswald did not fire a rifle on that day. The Zapruder film shows that the fatal bullet came from the grassy knoll, not 6 floors up in the Texas School Book Depository. If you've ever been there, you know how absurd that story is. And the wounds in President Kennedy were on the same horizontal plane, not from 6 floors above. Oswald has been confirmed as an FBI informant. He was confirmed by the Texas Attorney General and the Dallas District Attorney who investigated. And this is why you might remember that James Hosty, the FBI agent, flushed Oswald's note to the FBI down the drain so that they could destroy the evidence in that case. And finally, Oswald was confirmed by authors as working on CIA covert operations out of New Orleans. We'll be discussing that a little bit more in depth tonight on Brandon House's Worldview Weekend show. So basically, what I want to tie this to what actually our election reporting today. All serious researchers basically agree that the CIA played a key role in this assassination. They differ on how much. The CIA director, Alan Dulles, headed the Warren Commission investigation after being, even though the CIA was involved in this, he was appointed by Lyndon Baines Johnson. But what's interesting that I think that applies to what we're talking about today is that in 1975, the Church Committee investigated CIA abuses and media reporting, and they found that the Central Intelligence Agency had an operation called Operation Mockingbird, which had, quote, several hundred media assets. The CIA employed several hundred media assets to, quote, attempt to influence opinion through the use of covert propaganda. Now, if you think that only happened back then, let me fast forward you now to 2017. And German editor Udo Ulfkott, and I hope I didn't butcher his name too much, basically wrote a book called Journalists for Hire. And this was in the German translation. You cannot find this book in America anyway. We spent all day yesterday trying to get a copy of this book, but it has been banned in the United States. So because it is so, it exposes really everything that we really need to know. So the book is entitled Journalists for Hire, How the CIA Buys the News. He did this book in 2014 in Germany, and he died of heart failure in January of 2017 before the English version was ever released in America. So the bottom line that I want to get to, I want to tie that into what we're talking about today. I want to explain why are we getting all of this flack, despite we come out with facts and evidence. And David Kloss and his team, so many of us have been working so hard for a year to expose all these election integrity flaws, but yet we hear in certain selected media outlets and certain individuals and certain organizations that we hear these terms, fake electors, the claims have been debunked, the big lie. Oh, these are baseless claims, that we are conspiracy theorists and election deniers. I want to submit to you today that any organization that makes any one of these false statements is very likely has been paid off by the Central Intelligence Agency to, again, continue with false propaganda to the American people to dumb us down. Essentially, thank you. Thank you. So basically, they are trying to cancel the 2020, 2022, and 2024 elections, just like they did violently in 1960. So we're not going to take this. We're going to continue with Truth and Facts, just like we've been doing for the last 2 years. And with that said, I'm going to move right into the election anomalies. In 2020, here's what we found out. Both confirmed by affidavit and by the Edison media line feed, 23,411 votes were decreased on Herschel Walker's totals at 10 o'clock, on election night. His totals decreased by 23,411. We have a sworn affidavit to that. And this was reported by WSB, who got their information from the Secretary of State's office. We have asked them how this happened. They cannot explain. The Secretary of State's office can't explain why a candidate's vote would decrease. And the total line feed shows a total decrease of Herschel Walker's votes of 27,753. How did this happen? Now, there is a case where if a county backs out results, both candidates' results could decrease. That is possible. However, in this case, it was only Herschel Walker's votes that went down, and Raphael Warnock's votes were not affected. Therefore, there is something fundamentally wrong there. So that is one of the major anomalies that we have found. And then let's talk about just a couple more before I bring David up, who's going to go into this a little bit more depth on some of the analyses, anomalies. Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, who basically conducted the election on the machine that the United States District Court has already found violates 2 Georgia statutes, ended up with 10% more votes than the U.S. Senate candidate Walker, who was actually the first name on the ballot. That's pretty interesting. I don't know how that can happen, but it did. And he also got, even more bizarrely, got 5% more mail-in votes than the governor did, than Governor Brian Kemp. So what was the solution for these? Were these crossover votes or what? We don't really know for sure. But what's most interesting to me is that Stacey Abrams, who was the most popular and leader of the Democrat Party, the most popular candidate, ended up with 133,000 votes less than Raphael Warnock, 13,000 votes less than Jen Jordan, who was the Attorney General candidate, and 2,000 less votes than Charlie Bailey, who was the Lieutenant Governor candidate. I don't know. I've been tracking elections for 20 years. I've never seen a down ballot race outpoll the governor's race, much less 3 of them. So that is, and if you go back to 4 years ago, remember how popular Stacey Abrams was and how she was getting so many more votes than anybody on the down ballot race. She's considered to be the leader of the party, but suddenly she is no longer popular according to the Dominion voting system election results produced by the Secretary of State's office. So that said, I want to go into a couple of more anomalies, but I want to turn it over to David Cross, and he's going to talk a little bit about some more anomalies and the 2022 RLA, 2020 RLA audit, and then we're going to come back to the 2022 audit.
Thank you, Garland. So when I began this journey about 2 years ago, I thought within 6 months we would find the smoking gun, right? And as it turns out, we found about 14 different smoking guns along the way. One of the things that we noticed that happened in Texas as well as Georgia is that poll books, at the end of the day, inexplicably added hundreds more voters to the poll pads than actual people who voted. So in Bibb County, we have a report of 312. In Fulton County, 416 additional votes. In Cobb County, we have 300 to 400. Now, I'd love to be able to show you video of how this looks and what it looks like when it's occurring, but I can't because poll workers are not allowed to have cameras in the polling places. It's against the law. But we do have affidavits from all of the people who reported these things. This did happen, and people that are out there that are fraud deniers will say, "Oh no, it's just the way the technology updates it, during the day." And I'm telling you, this is supposedly a state-of-the-art system, and state-of-the-art systems don't do that. In addition, one of the things that we found along the way is coming into the upcoming election for November 8th. One of the things that I was really key on was I wanted to make sure that everything reconciled properly, all right? I run a business. I have to make sure that everything reconciles properly at the end of every day, at the end of every month. And if it doesn't, it means that I've got problems. My clients have got problems too. In the state of Georgia, one of the things that I wanted to have happen at every precinct is I wanted the poll workers, and I wanted the poll managers, and I wanted the election directors in each one of the counties to verify the data. What I wanted to have happen was I wanted to make sure that the number of ballots inside the machines match what was printed on the poll tape, and that number matched the number of ballots that were cast on the ballot marking devices, plus the provisionals of the drop-offs. I wanted to make sure that the number of paper ballots inside the machines also matched the number of people who checked in on the poll pads. And when I reached out to all 159 counties and sent out a message to all the counties, within 4 or 5 hours, the Secretary of State's office, through Blake Evans, responded with this email. And I know you can't see it, so I'm going to blow it up. One of the things that that I had said was I wanted to have those ballots counted. And Georgia state law in code section 212420-A says that the election superintendent shall then ensure that such ballots are processed, counted, and tabulated as soon as possible. Now, why would the law use counted and tabulated if it didn't specifically mean to use those two words? And they mean two different things. Counted means I want to count the number of pieces of paper that are inside the machine. Tabulated means that I want to know what the result was of each one of the races. So the code section in Georgia law uses both words. Again, what we want to have happen is we want the number of pieces of paper to match what that are inside the machine, to match the poll pad check-ins, to match the ballot marking device, and to match the tapes. And as it stands right now, Blake Evans sent out an email to all the counties that said, "Don't you dare count the ballots. We don't have time for that." I voted in Gwinnett County. And one of the things that happened there as I was walking out on election day was I asked the lady that I was given, that put my ballot in, I said, "Are you going to count the number of pieces of paper inside that machine?" And she said, "Sir, I have been here since 5:30 this morning, and I'm going to be lucky if I get home at 10:30 tonight. No, we are not counting the number of pieces of paper inside that machine. We trust the machines." So everybody places blind trust in these machines, even in Republican strongholds. And that goes back to one of the things that Garland was saying before too. And I used to think that it was the dirty Democrats that were gaming the system. What I have discovered along this journey is that Democrats and Republicans are equal to blame. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that if you're dealing with, we're dealing with a lot of people who are career politicians. I'm a big believer that if you come across a politician that's been in office for 15 or 20 years, chances are they're probably benefiting from the system and the games that are going on inside there. Now, when I reached out to all the counties and said, "You have to count these things," I got several counties that reached back to me and said, "Oh, no. The Secretary of State's office says we can't do that." And what I had to remind them was that in the current case right now, Pearson versus Kemp, the defendant, the Secretary of State, argues that the Secretary of State has no lawful authority over county election officials. So when I'm talking with election officials and asking them, "Please count the pieces of paper," they're frequently telling me, "Oh, that's a violation. I might get fired. I might get fired by the Secretary of State's office." And these people keep forgetting that the Secretary of State doesn't sign their check. The county that they work in signs their check. Their job is to follow the law, and I wholeheartedly want them to follow the law. But as I just showed you, the law says the ballots must be counted and tabulated, not just tabulated. And as it stands right now, the machines are just tabulating. So going back to 2020 for a moment, this is just another one of the games that we saw. The Secretary of State's office, when we went back and proofed the data, because apparently he doesn't believe in proofing the data. I mean, he's an engineer. And my understanding is that engineers are supposed to proof the data before they build a bridge. They didn't bother to proof anything. And he said, "I'm not responsible. I just report what the counties give me." So what we found there was a 60% batch error rate in the presidential race. And what that means is that the numbers that were reported on the risk limiting audit did not match the actual ballot image counts. We had 7 falsified tally sheets with 850 votes to 0 going to Biden and 0 going to Trump. Those have still been unexplained. We had 6,000 duplicate reported ballots, 350 duplicate scanned ballots, and we're missing tally sheets for over 100,000 ballots. You need to know that in the state of Georgia, nothing was ever verified on a statewide level. Georgia should have never been certified because the data was flawed. That's not to say that there aren't some counties, like Bartow County does a fantastic job of proofing their data before they report it, but the vast majority of counties in the state do not. That's it for me. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you. I just want to add 2 points to what David was saying. The work that David and his team did also was the basis for a 36-point study and a letter to the state election board by Governor Kemp. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands that Governor Kemp has agreed, and I think that about 34 of the 36 points in his study came from the work that we did, and David in particular, and the entire team of volunteers in finding all these errors, which were actually, this is just Fulton County for the most part. So I'm going to fast forward to 2022 and the RLA, but I think I just want to back up just for a second and summarize what you just heard, because what David is saying is that Secretary of State's office said we don't have to verify that the number of votes voted match the number of ballots cast at a precinct level. They're saying don't worry about that, which is exactly exactly opposite of what you should be doing. So thanks, David. And then the other thing that I think David mentioned that I just wanted to add a little bit onto, the governor and the state election board were also, in addition to the Secretary of State, they're all saying that counties officials have control in the Pearson suit. So, and this also, you've heard out there that there was some breach because Coffee County had tried to get a white hat to look at make sure their server was secure. Well, that is their prerogative, as David has pointed out in this lawsuit, as well as Georgia election law. They have to make sure that the election system is secure from the perspective of their constituents, which is what they were obviously trying to do. That's within their authority, as David explained. So let me fast forward to the 2022 risk limiting audit. You just heard that the Secretary of State has conducted a risk limiting audit that confirmed that the results that were originally reported were correct. Well, let me just point out 5 things why that's simply not true. The first thing is that the inventor of the risk limiting audit process, Dr. Philip Stark, who I know personally, has explained in writing to Georgia officials that the RLAs cannot be meaningfully used on a ballot marking device system, which is what we have. He says you cannot use my technique on a ballot marking device system because it won't work. And the reason he's saying is that he can't audit, RLA cannot audit the ballot marking device. It cannot audit that the ballot marking device presented the information to the user correctly. There's no way to audit that. It doesn't, was never intended to do that. So in order to do that, you have to have an original record of the voter intent. The original record of the voter intent is a hand-marked paper ballot. And he says, and RLAs work for that. They do not work for BMD. So this whole thing that we're under here in Georgia where, we're using risk limiting audits to verify election results, that's all totally hogwash, not Gone Federal, VoterGA, or David Cross saying that, but the inventor of the risk limiting audit process himself, Dr. Philip Stark, has already explained this to Georgia government officials before they decided to do it. So that is that's the first most major problem, but you can just go down, there's more and more major problems. First of all, another one. Secretary of State decided to select his own race because it, quote, admitted this, it had a wider margin so that we could get it done faster. That is exactly opposite of the purpose of any type of audit. You want to ensure that particularly a close race is correct, not the one that nobody cares about. This is what the Secretary of State decided to do. The other thing is he selected batches and not ballots. So the number of ballots vary by batch. So that is not appropriate thing to do because that disproportionately applied the audit across different counties differently. And that's a violation of equal protection laws in both the state and the United States constitutions. So the ballots have to be randomly selected by county. They can't be batches that are predetermined by the Secretary of State. That's just not appropriate, even if he used dice to to decide which batches that they were going to do. You've got to do that for ballots. And finally, risk limiting audits, if you were to, or any audit for that matter, would have to require you to audit all types of ballots. The counties did not even audit election day ballots for the most part. They only audited mail-in and early voting. So that said, well, just quickly, I want to just mention too, our new litigation. I want to announce to you today that VoterGA has filed new litigation in order to preserve ballots and in order to hold counties accountable for the destruction of the original ballot images dating back to 2020. So we filed it against the counties that had the most egregious violations. I mentioned to you there was 1.7 million original ballot images that were destroyed for the 2020 election. We filed against three of the most egregious counties, which had about 700,000 of those ballot images destroyed. We are seeking to preserve the ballots indefinitely, the 2020 election ballots indefinitely. We're requesting the court to order that. And we are seeking to unseal those ballots and make them available for independent high-res scanning so we can determine not only the voting system results are correct, but also that there are no counterfeits in there. So we initially filed this against Cobb County, Coweta, and Forsyth. We are in the process of possibly adding more counties to this over the period of time. No ballots, to my knowledge, have been destroyed yet because the process has to go through a grand jury. There won't be any grand juries meeting in the counties until next month, as far as I know. So very quickly, just to mention why the ballot images are important. Ballot images are digital copies of ballots, as y'all know, electronic copies of ballots. A ballot is the most important election record ever captured because it's the only record that can reproduce the results. No other election record can reproduce the results. So the ballot is the most important election record. Ballot images are created automatically when the ballots are scanned, and they are required to tabulate votes. So you can't have a vote without a ballot image because the process is that you look at the ballot image, then the system looks at the ballot image, it interprets the image, it creates what we call a cast vote record, and then that cast vote record is used to tabulate the results. So no image, no vote. That's the way it works. And yet we have found, and David's team and that has found that 17,000 votes are in Fulton County results right now with no ballot images. So for these reasons, the federal and state law is very clear. Ballot images are a critical part of the election records, and they're required to be retained for 22 months federally, 24 months state. And that law was in place before ballot images were ever made public in 2021 via Senate Bill 202. So there's a difference. So you're required to retain them no matter what. Then if they were made public in 2022, that doesn't mean you didn't have to retain them before. You're required to retain all election records. So the Secretary of State's office has been involved in this because they have authorized the destruction of the memory cards to counties. Here's an example from former elections director Chris Harvey, who said, go ahead and reuse the memory cards. The memory cards had the ballot images on it from in-person voting. He says, just go ahead and reuse them. In other words, overwrite them and use them again. $10 memory card. We spent $100 million for machines, but we have to overwrite $10 memory card. That doesn't seem very cost effective to me. I think that there's another issue there, is another reason why they wanted those memory cards overwritten. Likewise, the Assistant Director, Elections Director Michael Barnes, also authorized another county, said you can clear the CF cards, those are compact flash memory cards, that's what he means by that, whenever you were ready. So that's not what the law says. That's not what federal law says. That's not what state law says. So we continue to point out, conditions where the Secretary of State's office is in clear violation of both federal and state law. And we're interested in having the media follow up with this so we can get some of these mockingbirds to actually ask the Secretary of State's office about these things, see what they say. So just to quickly just mention, as I told you before, there were 70 counties could not produce their original ballot images, 1.7 million plus missing. And these are the total numbers that you can see. We'll make these slides available for you. So most of these counties admitted to destroying their images. And only a few of them refused to comply with open records requests, which is another issue. So just really quickly, I'm just going to go through and show you the counties. We had 6 counties virtually had no images at all. Some of these because of their machines malfunction. There are a couple of cases where, like Coffee and Fannin, may be legitimate because they had serious problems in the 2020 election. 17 counties only had recount images. Now, I want to make sure that everybody understands why this is not valid. They said, well, we don't have the originals, but we have it from the recount that was conducted in December. We don't have the original ballot images, but here, we'll give you those. There you go. Well, no, that doesn't work because all of your audit data has been destroyed. There's no original timestamp on the image, and this has been instrumental in us being able to uncover election manipulation of the images. So you have to have the original timestamp for the audit purpose, not the recount timestamp. There's no original metadata to show how the ballot selections were interpreted. If you have a recount, you've got the metadata for the recount, but you don't have the metadata for the original. That's not, that doesn't work. So that you lose your audit trail on both of these. And then finally, if you're giving us a recount image, how do we know that the image wasn't changed between November 14th or 15th and December 5th or so, whenever the recount was conducted? We don't know that. There's no way to prove it. No, there's no chain of custody on the images. No one knows. So for those reasons, recount images are absolutely invalid when it comes to the original election results. That's why you have to retain the original ballot images. Finally, we found about 34 counties that had incomplete results. Most of these are missing thousands. You know, we're not saying that they're missing, when they say incomplete, we're not saying that they're missing a dozen images. Most of these are missing, they're typically missing at the minimum hundreds, but in most cases thousands, missing whole groups of images, such as all in-person voting or all mail-in voting, so on and so on. And then finally, I mentioned before that we have 13 counties that didn't comply with ORRs. Some of them just really wanted way too much money, and we felt that was inappropriate. We got one letter back where they wanted $15,000 for ballot images. In reality, ballot images typically would go on a memory stick and it cost you about $25. That's what it should cost. But we had people wanting $250 for them, organization. We had one county that wanted us to come and get them. So we're not sending them to you, but if you want to come down, you can get it. So we'd have to make a trip to the county, pick up the images. It's like, no, I don't think so. So that's kind of the nutshell of what we found in the ballot image. We're trying to pursue this as promptly and efficiently as we possibly can. And I'm going to stop here for questions with David and myself. I just wanted to mention before we do, we are VoterGA, voterga.org. These are our social media platforms. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit 501c3. Your donations are tax deductible. We need your support to continue doing this incredible work that we're doing. And I want to make sure that everyone knows we're volunteers. David has a full-time job. I'm retired. All of our team, quite a few of you are sitting here, we're all volunteers. And we do this, and because I cannot take a salary for doing this, it's just not appropriate. I do this, I'm retired, I can make do, and we want to do this we want to save Georgia. That's what we really want to do, and saving Georgia will save America. So with that, I'm going to stop and I'll open it up for a few questions. I see we have a few questions. I'll try to repeat the question for the audience, and I ask David to come up and join us, join me, and we'll take any questions that you might have. And I see John's got his hand up.
So I was involved in going around to the polling places on election night and taking pictures of the tapes. When I got to one of them, they were in a conflict between the ballot count and the ballot marking device count. So they had actually counted the ballots and found that there was a discrepancy of something like 12 or 13 ballots. And some friends of mine were staying there, and I think they were there for 2 hours and finally gave up waiting for them to figure out what the discrepancy was.
David, you want to take it? So the discrepancy, the question was a discrepancy between the ballot marking device count and the count of the scanners. Is that right?
The actual ballots. Yes.
13, oh, physical ballots. Discrepancy of,
physical ballots.
discrepancy of 13 between the ballot marking device count and the physical ballots.
Okay, so 13 doesn't sound very, like very much. And there's a lot of people that are out there. Again, the fraud deniers will say it's just 13 ballots. It's statistically insignificant, right? Until you understand that there are 2,700 precincts in the state of Georgia. Each precinct has got multiple machines that are working there. I think when you explain what happened there with the numbers not aligning, what we believe happened there is something that's been called the Williamson anomaly or the Williamson error that happened up in Tennessee. And in Tennessee, in October of last year, there was an alderman's race. At the end of the evening, there were 330 ballots, pieces of paper, were inside 2 machines. But the poll tapes only registered 98 total votes, 19 on one machine and 79 on another. So it missed 70% of all the votes. And my team has reached out to the United States government. They have something called the Election Assistance Commission, shortened down to EAC. I've asked them to send me documentation of their study that they did on Williamson County, Tennessee. And they said, you are number 141 in line, and we will get to your request promptly. And we expect to fulfill your request in December of 23. So not even this year, next year. So this is just simple, press a couple buttons and send me the file. It's not that difficult, but we believe that's what was happening. And in our study and looking across Georgia, we asked all the counties in Georgia to give us their system log files. And again, the Secretary of State unlawfully blocked us from getting those from as many counties because he was telling the counties that giving us the data would harm future elections, which is total nonsense because San Francisco County, California posts theirs online for all the world to see. So if it's good enough for them, it's probably okay in Georgia too. And what we found when we asked for these files, we asked all 159 counties on a single day. The Secretary of State blocked us. I had to literally file a complaint with the Inspector General, which is something that Garland had instructed me to do. And as soon as I did that, lo and behold, the floodgates opened and I started getting files, but I only got them from a total of 67 counties in the state. And what we found is 65 out of 67 counties had the exact same error, word for word, that Williamson County, Tennessee had. So I have zero confidence that all of the scanners in Georgia are working properly. And it doesn't mean that some aren't counting properly. If I had to guess, probably half of them are, and probably half of them aren't, with varying degrees of accuracy. But overall, again, Georgia's got a system that gives uncertifiable data.
And before okay, John wants to follow up. I just want to add one little point quick. It's possible that a ballot marking device could have more votes than, but not less. And that's the issue, because you could spoil a ballot. But there is no explanation for this other than, and this is what David is following for. He's going to deal with. John, you had to follow up.
So if the problem was the Williamson County problem and this was only 13. The point where it broke in other counties could be more like Williamson, where it was 300 or so ballots were in difference.
Yeah, it could be more, it could be less, but the only way to know for sure is to count the pieces of paper and reconcile it against what the ballot marking device says and what the poll pad check-ins say. And one of the things I want to make clear here is that most people don't know this, is that Georgia is I think the only state in the country that all the counties use a ballot marking device. And a ballot marking device is actually it was specifically designed for handicapped people that couldn't fill out their ballots, and it made it easy to have a touch screen. We all look at it today as if it's some type of convenience, but what people don't understand that's critical is that a computer has to interpret what you touched on the screen, so it can then turn that into its interpretation of what you voted, which takes that interpretation and converts it into a QR code. And then it prints the QR code out, which is another interpretation of interpreted data. And then when you go put your ballot into the scanner has to uninterpret your QR code, which is you have 3 unnecessary functions that are happening there that most other municipalities and counties across the country say you're getting a paper ballot and you're filling out the paper ballot and we're going to score that.
And let me, before I go to Michael and Jenny, I just want to add one more thing. I haven't actually talked with David about this, but I believe that we have an actual example of the Williamson County era. If you remember the DeKalb County District 2 Commission race, when Michelle Long Spears was shorted 3,000 votes. They only found out about this because she didn't get any votes in the precinct where her and her husband lived and voted. And she raised the issue and they audited the race. It was the only race that was audited in the 2024 primary. What they found out was that Michelle Long Spears was shorted 3,000 votes. 1,400 went to a competitor who was unearned. There were 1,400 unearned votes. He never got those votes. The machines actually gave him the votes. But what's interesting about this is the machines failed to count 1,800 votes. And that fits the pattern of the Williamson County era. I can't say for sure that that's what it is, but it was a complete breakdown by the voting system and this race. And this race was the only race that was audited. And so that means that the Dominion voting system had a 0% accuracy rate in audited races in the 2024 primary. I think Michael was next to me, Jay.
Now, I'd like for everyone to know and recognize Garland for all the work that he has done over the years. And I met Garland in 2002, 2003, and we traveled around the state giving lectures on the Diebold voting machines. Garland understands this issue and the problem perhaps better than anybody else in the nation. He has worked long and hard on it. I consider him an expert, and his analysis is very detailed and formidable and will stand up in any court as long as we get a judge who gives a valid court hearing. And so I just can't say enough things about Garland and how much work and how hard work and detailed work that he's put in this effort over the last 20 years.
Well, thank you, Michael. Unfortunately, we didn't have you mic'd. So the people at home are not going to hear all those the glorious praise, but I appreciate this. But we do it for a high call. So Jenny, and then we'll go to Enid.
Okay. Should the poll watcher, even a poll worker, catch this? So the poll pad you're saying the poll pad is different than the BMD. The BMD's, in some of these instances, BMD is different than the scanner. Am I getting that right?
Poll pad is when you go in and you check in. You're going to give somebody your driver's license. That's the poll pad that says, and that's the first counting device. At the end of the day, if the precinct says that 300 people checked in, then there should be 300 votes over on the BMD, and there should be 300 pieces of paper inside the scanner, and the scanner should say there were 300 total votes on that machine.
So my question is, unless a ballot was spoiled, and there might be one or two at the end of the day that might not match exactly, and they should have a reason for that on their records that, oh yes, we had to give them a new ballot, you know, or a new little card, you know. Why would they close out the precinct at all if the numbers were different?
Why close out the precinct? Let's repeat the
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
Why close out the precinct if the numbers are different?
Right.
Because they're tired. They want to go home. They've been there since 5:30 in the morning. And I get that. I understand. But
So
the,
you're saying that, okay, that some of these precincts might not have poll watchers? Is that, do you know if that happened, if that was maybe the case, that they didn't have poll watchers? Because we're supposed to report that to our
Yeah, so
county.
some of the precincts didn't have poll watchers, so they weren't reported. So here's the thing that I've learned, and this was a real revelation for me over the last 20 years. I've learned one important thing, that elections officials don't really care if the right person won. What they really want is a clean, clear election, quiet election. They just want everything to be quiet. And as David has already said, they just want to go home. And if the poll books don't match, if the number of voters voted don't match the number of cast ballots, well, there's nothing that they feel like they want to do or can do about it. And they just shrug their shoulders. They go home and says, okay.
So they
I'm
sort of just put, you're saying that they're pushing it on to the next level, you know?
Well,
okay,
not-
we couldn't match it up, so it's your problem now at the county.
I don't even think that they're pushing it on to the next level. I mean, yeah, maybe but basically they're just really, what they're really doing is sweeping it under the rug. And we have a couple of poll watchers, poll workers here in the room. So I'm not talking about y'all. But because I know y'all are dedicated. But really, that's really what the mentality is. And this is the second, you see it at Secretary of State's office as well. All he wants to do is check a box and say
Done.
that he did a risk limiting audit. That's what the law required. So he wants to pretend that he did a risk limiting audit and check that box off. And the polyparity Mockingbird media will go right behind him and say, oh yeah, he did that. Everything is good.
so one of your questions before was what should we do if we see that? If you're a poll worker, if you're a poll observer and you see something, the main thing you have to do immediately is document it. So, everybody carries phones. Make a little video recording of what you saw. It'll have the timestamp on there. It'll have the date on there. And then the thing we have to do after that is you please email this documentation to us at alertvoterga@protonmail.com.
But then you can't have a recording device.
No, I'm saying when you can walk outside and pick up your phone,
Yes.
right? When you're done, you can walk outside, pick up your phone and say, my name is such and such. Today is, date. This is what I experienced. This is what I saw, and then report that. We don't need conclusions or anything like that, or what, you can say, I guess you can say what you suspect happened, but the main thing to do is get us as much fact as possible. So we're using a two-pronged approach here. So alertvoterga@protonmail.com is where you can report those anomalies. And then when you do that, we're probably also going to send you something called votifynow.org. It's an app that'll electronically record that. And then what it's doing is that's looking for anomalies and how they match up, and using artificial intelligence to look for patterns in data across the country. So we're really trying to leverage the observers that are out there. And thank goodness that there are so many more people that are involved in our elections now, because it's going to make it a lot harder to cheat.
Enid, you had a question?
Okay, I have so many questions on the chart.
Okay.
Okay, first of all, I have tried, I don't know why, but I'm a curious kind of person. It sure looks to me from 30,000 feet above, I'm looking down on this mess in Georgia, and I say, looks like they're playing hot potato because conveniently the way our laws are written in this state, it lets the Secretary of State say, I don't have any power. And then you hear at the county level, wow, boy, we're going to get sued by our attorney said we could be in violation. We could get $5,000 fine a day. We can't do that. We can't do that. You just showed us the code that said the election superintendent will count and tabulate. You just told us, and I've heard it too, I've worked the polls, we are so darn tired by 5:30, 7 o'clock. No, we don't want to do anything, and we sure don't want to count the ballots. But somebody's supposed to. And then finally, there doesn't seem to be any recompense, there doesn't seem to be any remedy for when somebody won't honor your official records request. There seems to be no teeth in it. And so that must be very frustrating, but before I finish, I wanted to ask a very important question in my mind about the voting. You've just talked about the tabulators, the scanners, and the inherent problems with it. Is there more of a risk of, I call it chicanery, but we'll call it a risk of the voter's intent not being recorded correctly? Is there more of a risk of that on day of, or is there more risk of that on advanced voting or in your opinion? Do they use the same scanners?
Okay, so the question is there more of a risk of when's the best time to vote and the best type to vote to reduce your risk? So in Georgia, unfortunately, we are forced to vote, if you vote in person, on a machine that is in violation of Georgia law according to the United States District Court. I personally choose not to do that. I vote by mail. So at least as long as I get a ballot, that's the first question. So I prefer not to do that. I prefer to vote by mail. Then the question is, if you vote by mail, supposedly you should get your ballot really early, as soon as you can, so that you can get checked off the list as requesting it, so that nobody can stuff a ballot in for you. And then the theory has been to turn that ballot in as late as possible, either on election day or the last day of early voting, so that you have to protect yourself against any algorithms that might be running on the voting system that is unverifiable and secretly counts our elections.
There's the same standard though in each of those scenarios, am I correct? Do each of these ballots, do each of these submissions get massaged through a tablet?
All right, so the question is, are the same scanners used? And the answer is no. So what's going to happen is on the ballot that Garland turns in, where he's filled out an actual paper ballot, that gets scanned at something called central scanning. It's scanned on something called an image cast central. There's usually kept at the county elections office. The precinct scanners, those are known as image cast precincts or ICPs. Those are at the precincts. Those are what score or what count and tabulate the ballots at the precincts that come out of the ballot marking device.
Yes, but the point that you're driving at, which is a very good point, and we want to make sure the audience gets this, is that those scanners, regardless of whether it's central or precinct, can manipulate the election results, and you don't have enough eyes on it to prevent to make sure that that's not happening. So that's your real point, and this is why we really need to get rid of equipment altogether and just go to public hand counting of ballots, and we don't have to worry about that anymore.
I would trust 10th graders and 11th graders to count our ballots more than I trust these machines.
Just look at Maricopa County. It took them a week to count the ballots.
Right. It's Maricopa County. Why is this taking so long? You know, we have counted elections manually in the past in a day or two. There's no reason for this to continue on in Maricopa County unless they're looking to stuff more ballots in and change the results of the election, which appears is exactly what they did in Maricopa in 2022.
Yes.
So David, in that code section that you showed, 420, that says count and tabulate, did the email from Blake Evans say how they interpret that code section? I mean, how are they just tabulating?
I'll show you.
Ignoring that.
This thing really likes to go slow.
The question has to do with the code section and
And
how
how
it's interpreted.
Here's what he says. I know that many counties have received an email requesting that poll workers hand count ballots at polling places on election night. Deciding to have poll workers hand count ballots at each polling location on election night is not something your poll workers should do.
But he doesn't say how he interprets that paragraph in 420.
Well, he's instructing them not to do it right here. But the reality is that, the words count and tabulated are in the law. So they should be counting those things. And he's telling them, don't count.
He's encouraging them to break the law.
Right.
That could be a lawsuit.
And just to add, right, and just to add to that, this is not just some isolated example. We just showed you, in addition to Blake Evans, we just showed you two other ones further on down here, where here you've got the former elections director telling them to violate the law in the state of Georgia and federal law, and you've got also the assistant elections director who's still there telling them to violate federal and state law. And that's why we don't have the results and the images, is because they are just instructed. And as David has said, they just go along with whatever the Secretary of State tells them to do, despite the fact that David also explained that the lawsuit says, we have the Secretary of State, the governor, and the state election board all saying that they don't have authority over the counties. Yes, sir, Mike.
With the recent Supreme Court ruling that citizens, voters can sue individuals, this really does open the door to hold these people accountable. Now, if they can be sued by us, and you get enough lawsuits, the question is, we're suing them individually, so they're not covered by any state protection. Is that correct?
Well, okay, so the
We
Georgia,
want them to pay for their own attorneys.
yeah, so no, the Georgia Supreme Court has recently ruled, and this, all they did was corroborate what we've known all along. They didn't actually change anything, that we as voters can sue government officials for when they violate the law. Yeah, well, we've already known that. It's only until our case came along, and the Sons of Confederate Veterans case, in which they decided, and this was all done by one judge, Judge Brian Amaro, out of Henry County. He was the one who was in both of these cases and said, well, we don't have one standing, and because he didn't want to deal with it. That's just not the way a judge should work. But you would, based on sovereign immunity, you would need to sue the individuals in their official capacities, or the government. Actually, technically,
If it's a criminal act, the
technically,
state is not considered to be a co-conspirator in a criminal act. With this act, could we, or would
Yeah.
it take a grand jury? That's Paul
well, you would have to sue the state. You would have to sue the state and as an entity when government officials violate the law. But the other point, though, is this is when they violate the law, they're committing criminal acts, and that's a criminal situation, not a civil situation. And the appropriate remedy for that is to take that to the grand jury if you can get it past the district attorneys that are trying to block citizens of their constitutional right, which ever since America was founded, of being able to take issues to a grand jury and get either a true bill or a no bill on them. Ginny.
So it seems like that the poll watchers should be going to their jobs with this page here or with this information, because your poll manager will say to you, this is what I've been told to do. They're going to follow their procedures. This says that that the SOS has no authority over the election poll workers.
Okay, so she's asking, should I take something like this to my poll as a poll worker?
Yes.
I would say,
poll watcher.
or as a poll watcher, I would say no, all right? Because you're going to get thrown out, all right? And the other thing you can't do either is do not say a word to anybody on social media about you being a poll watcher or poll worker, because the deep state is watching this and they are reporting back to the Secretary of State's office, and they are yanking people as they're going to check in to work and saying, hey, we saw you made a social media post. You're out of here.
And is that legal?
Is it legal?
Yeah. All she was exercising freedom of speech.
I don't think it's legal, but
Yeah, go sue
but
them.
at this point right now, it's like suing City Hall.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you did do that, let's suppose you did take it to them, they're so ingrained in their mentality that there is no document that you can put under their nose, despite the fact that it's got a court file date timestamp on it, that would cause them to reconsider how they've been psychologically programmed for the last 10 years, and then suddenly come to an epiphany and say, okay, I've been wrong all this time. I'm going to change right now. I don't see that really happening.
This is something I think you need to take to your election board ahead of time and show that to them. You need to use the buzzwords that they're accustomed to hearing. Voter disenfranchisement, right? You need to let them know that you're concerned about voter disenfranchisement.
Which is what we've all had here in Georgia for the last 20 years with unverifiable electronic voting machines. All right, I think that we are done. I'm sorry,
I have a question.
Janelle.
I know that there's hope with one of the litigations coming up on December 5th, I believe. Are you going to be able to finally present evidence, and are you going to be able to cross-examine? Should we be there?
Yes,
To be able
please.
to get ballots?
Thank you for bringing that up. We will have a hearing. We have 6 active court cases. Our next court hearing is Monday, December the 5th at 11 a.m., Fulton County Superior Court. I think it's going to be back in courtroom 9J. This was the Phil Chin election challenge where a candidate who was never printed on any ballot and had withdrawn before the ballots were printed got 3,317 votes. That's not possible. So we are going to be having a hearing on this. We're going to, I think, be able to present some additional evidence that we have just uncovered, which we will be, we've already had one hearing, but, and we're going to get, that hearing is up on VoterGA.org events tab now. But what's significant about this case coming up next Monday is that they will, or Monday after, Fulton County is going to have to defend their actions. They're going to have to defend their actions. So that's going to be extremely interesting, is how they're going to explain that there's no problem just because the candidate got 3,300 votes and was never on a ballot, then we don't need to see the ballots. We fixed it. Don't worry about it. Go away. Nothing to see here. They're going to have to defend that in court. So far, the rulings have gone our way. We have been able to beat back their motion to dismiss. The judges knocked that out. But what's most interesting about this case coming up on Monday week is December the 5th. They're going to have to call witnesses to defend themselves, and the witness they'll probably most likely call is Dominique Alomo, who has been running the Fulton County elections, technical aspects of Fulton County elections for the last 2 years. So we will get the opportunity to cross-examine and rebut him, and that is should be priceless. I would say that you would probably want to be there Monday, December 5th at 11 a.m. So please, we hope to see you there.
Where is it?
I'll be there at Fulton County Superior Court. It's 143 Prior Street, I believe, is the physical address in downtown Atlanta. 30303, I think.
Thank you.
So thanks for asking that, Janelle. That was incredibly important. All right, Enid.
Do you know if there's any attempt or groundswell to try to get us disengaged from Eric?
Oh, is there any attempt to get us disengaged from Eric? Funny that you mentioned that. We do have an active lawsuit. We have an active lawsuit against the Secretary of State for outsourcing our voter data to third parties. that we originally filed that because of the Salesforce case, when he outsourced it in Jarvis, which is coming down and going to outsource our voter registration data. But then when we got into it, we realized, well, wait a minute, he's already done this with Eric. And it's also gone to other places, like apparently from Eric, and one of them might have been Connick. So we are actively pursuing that right now to see that we would consolidate that as one, because the bottom line of it is he did not have authority to outsource voter registration data. And you can read our complaint out there, but it violates election privacy laws. He violated the bid contract procedures by doing this as a $3.5 million no bid when he was supposed to get a bid over 100,000. And he violated the scope of authority that the General Assembly gave him, because the General Assembly never gave him authority to house voter registration data outside of his own domain.
So this cause of action is active, it's alive?
Active, it's an active lawsuit right now. We don't have a hearing date yet, but we may have some breaking news on this next week. If we have breaking news, we'll have another press conference next week because it'll be really significantly important. John.
So you had a petition to view the Fulton County ballots, which was dismissed for lack of standing. And now this Georgia Supreme Court has now said you have standing. Have you reinitiated that petition, and where are you with that?
Yes. Okay. Where are we with the petition on the Fulton County counterfeit ballot lawsuit, which was dismissed, claiming that we didn't have standing? However, as John has explained, the Georgia Supreme Court has said, oh, wait a minute, every citizen has standing to sue our government officials who violate law, which is exactly what we're doing. So where do we stand with that? Once we heard the Sons of Confederate Veteran case, which, by the way, our attorney, Todd Harding, has been telling us for a year, watch this case. Ever since it was first dismissed, he knew that this case would be instrumental in making a decision in our case. So sure enough, Sons of Confederate Veterans did, in fact, the case was, the Supreme Court found that they did have standing. This case, by the way, just so everybody knows, is that the individuals, including the Sons of Confederate Veterans, were suing for the illegal removal of Confederate monuments, which basically is a complete violation of Georgia law, whether you like them or not. So they sued, and Judge Amaro, same judge, says, well, you don't have standing to sue. Well, of course, basically the Georgia Supreme Court has overturned Judge Amaro on the same thing that he said that we didn't have standing for. So it's obvious, but when they did this, the Georgia Supreme Court also took it one step further, and they said, not only do citizens, residents, and taxpayers have the right to sue a government official who violates the law, but we are extending this to voters. So they said that we are extending it with voters. So I'm a citizen, I'm a resident, I'm a taxpayer of Fulton County, and I'm a voter of tax, and my vote didn't count. So if that doesn't give me standing to sue Fulton County, I don't know what on earth does. But anyway, we will so what we did, to get to your point, is we filed an immediate expedite of that hearing, of that ruling, and the Supreme Court said we want the defendants to reply, and they gave them like 3 days. So the defendants gave this reply on Friday. I don't even think we've posted it yet. An absurd reply saying that the Sons of Confederate Veterans case doesn't even apply, and there's not a shred of evidence that we have. Just absolutely lie after lie after lie that these lawyers can literally make up anything and get away with it. So the bottom line is we're waiting for the Georgia Supreme Court to rule on our specific case. We've had it before them for a long time. We're hoping that they'll rule on our specific case, and that we think that they'll just say we've already ruled on this in Sons of Confederate Veterans. It's the same thing, and we think that they will boot that case back to Judge Amaro also, and he'll have his hands full with two things he should have done to begin with. Okay, I think that we are about done because we've got to get ready to to stream this for 1 o'clock. I want to thank everybody for coming and just want to remind you, VoterGA.org, we are all volunteers. We need your donations to continue to survive, and we will see you on the 5th of December at Fulton County Superior Court. Thank you. Bye-bye.